Let's say you want to scam the biggest bank on Wall Street out of millions of dollars. You would think it would take some expert-level con artistry to pull that off, but today I'm going to show you just how little effort is required, because in this video we're breaking down how this woman conned the largest US bank, JPMorgan, into paying $175 million for buying a totally fake company when she was only in her 20s. Welcome back to this series on Charlie Javice, the Elizabeth Holmes of FinTech. We have covered a lot so far. In episode 1, we learned about Charlie's first shady startup, which promised to rid the world of poverty, but whose bold claims were questionable to say the least. And then I told you about her next two failed ventures, where she lost $500,000 in investor funds and got sued by her co-founder for allegedly failing to pay him. Then in episode 2, we untangled the web of deception that Charlie spun around her next company called Frank, which is the one that JPMorgan paid all that money for, a company that claimed to help students pay for the college of their dreams, but in reality pushed predatory loans on them through blatantly false advertising that got them in trouble with the federal government. But despite the many red flags surrounding Charlie's startup Frank, investors in the media hailed her as the hero of higher education, showering her with so much money and so many awards that she scored a meeting with the CEO of JPMorgan Chase. And that is where we pick up with this episode. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how Charlie faked her company's data to con this financial giant into buying her BS company. Y'all, I have dug through the archives of the internet to figure out how she pulled this off, including the egregious changes that she made to Frank's website right around the time she was pitching her company to banks for investment. I've also combed through the court records and found internal Slack messages from Charlie's company that show her employees freaking out behind the scenes as Charlie pushed miraculous claims about Frank's success. Plus, I'm going to show you the dirty tricks that Charlie pulled to cover her tracks, like the computer scientist that she paid handsomely to help her falsify Frank's data, and the last-minute shopping spree that her co-founder went on to pull the wool over JPMorgan's eyes. It's going to be a mess of sneaky moves and stupid short-sightedness, so get your mugs out, cause we bout to guzzle, y'all. If you listen to Charlie Javice talk about her company Frank, you would think that it was on fire.
We started Frank with really thinking about how are we the ally for the student and the family.
Frank was supposed to help students apply for money to go to college, and Charlie made it seem like her website was so popular that it was the go-to destination for young people who were starting to think about their financial future. And if you think about it, that's a very powerful position to be in. Imagine you're the first stop for a high schooler who may not even have a bank account yet, and you're going to help them apply for grants and scholarships that could send more money their way than they have ever had access to. And when that money arrives, they're going to need a checking account to deposit all that cash. And if you're the lucky bank that scores their business, then there's a good chance that you'll keep them as a customer for years to come. And this is exactly what JPMorgan Bank was thinking when they started eyeing Charlie's company Frank for acquisition. See, JPMorgan was desperate to get a piece of that lucrative college market because banks love selling their products to college kids because college kids are often naive idiots when it comes to money. Now that said, in recent years, old school banks have been struggling to attract college students as customers. Back in the day when I went to college, it was way easier for them because all they had to do was stack up some pizza boxes on a table in front of the student center and promise kids a free pie if they signed up for a credit card.
Free pizza. It sounded good to Tracy Texley.
Fill out this little thing.
That little thing was paperwork for a credit card.
College campuses will be bustling with a new group of young consumers who could be targeted by companies trying to cash in on their financial vulnerability.
No annual fee, doesn't cost nothing.
At this table, a completed MasterCard application yields a free t-shirt or phone card. Same thing at this American Express table. You just signed up for a credit card? Mm-hmm. How come?
They were giving away free calling cards.
That's 20 minutes a long distance?
I think so.
In a recent survey of 1,500 college students, 3 of 4 students stopped at tables on campus to consider offers or to even apply for credit cards in exchange for t-shirts, sandwiches, and iPod shuffles.
They'll give away, free Cokes or free t-shirts, and I have friends who they'll sign up for anything to get a free t-shirt,
Nina Lillian was just a freshman in college when a credit card company offered her a free gift to sign up.
I didn't have any income coming in at the time. It was more or less like a instant approval. I was approved right then and there.
Back then, banks could give pretty much anybody a loan because Congress had not yet passed the law that made banks actually verify a student's income or their ability to pay a loan back. A kid fresh out of high school could just write down any old number. Yeah, sure, I make $50K a year. And the bank would say, cool, here's a credit card. And what kind of pizza do you want? Pepperoni or cheese? Then the kid would think, sweet, I just got free pizza and a whole bunch of cash, so shots are on me tonight, boys. And it wouldn't take long before the kid maxed out the card without understanding that the bank was going to charge them a ton of interest and fees when they didn't pay this money back on time.
Started, buying groceries and paying for gas.
That turned into a big problem.
So I went over the limit, and so I just huge charges.
CBS reported in 2009 that the average college senior had over $4,000 in credit card debt, but when it asked students whether they knew what their APR, or annual percentage rate of interest, was, the results were dismal.
I don't even know what that means.
I have no clue. No. I don't have a clue, actually. I have no idea. I think it's 2 point, is that possible? 2 point something?
At 18, you really don't comprehend the consequences of overspending on a credit card.
Aaron says companies target college students since they are financially inexperienced.
We have young men and women who are being taken advantage of, who don't have the resources or the income to pay these credit card bills, and what we're seeing is a problem that's going to end up crippling them financially in the future.
Instead of just saying, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea for you, they give high-risk people a higher interest rate.
Tracy's interest rate was at 28%, and her debt had ballooned to more than $7,200.
Nearly 2 in 3 students reported having a credit card, and of those students, card debt doubled by their senior year.
I'm trying to get out of it, but every month it seems like interest just piles on and piles on.
And as Tracy's paying things off, she's looking at that supposed freebie in a whole new way.
This piece of pizza was about $1,000. This is a very expensive piece of pizza.
Now, this free buffet of naive college students that the banking industry had been gorging on for years had long since shut down by the time that JPMorgan was thinking about buying Charlie's company, Frank.
There's a change on campus this fall, and it has to do with credit card vendors, who just a few years ago you couldn't avoid.
President Obama this afternoon signed the new credit card reforms into law while warning greedy credit card companies to act responsibly.
It's the first time ever that the Congress has regulated the credit card industry, and these abuses, of course, have been gouging consumers.
The law has been dubbed the Credit Card Holders' Bill of Rights.
The new Federal Card Act prohibits credit card companies from soliciting on campus.
Companies can no longer offer free gifts, and if a student is younger than 21 and wants an account in their own name,
The person would have to show enough income to qualify or get an adult to co-sign the application.
These new regulations made it much harder for big banks to attract young new customers, and since then, the market's gotten even tougher for banks as big tech has increasingly invaded their territory. Nowadays, there is a ton of competition for traditional banks. There's Chime, Cash App, Google Pay, Apple Pay, Meta Pay. Apple's even offering savings accounts now, and so with all of these sleek, techie options, old school banks are not exactly the first choice of the younger generation. I mean, if you're a Gen Zer looking for a bank account, are you going to sign up on Chase's basic site or on Cash App's site that looks dope as hell? Honestly, JPMorgan Chase should have just hired a web designer to tap the college market, but instead they started buying up fintech companies out of fear, which brings us back to why they rushed to invest in Charlie's startup, Frank.
The credit card companies did not give up on targeting to that population, specifically because they have a history of paying them a lot of money in interest and fees.
JPMorgan wanted to snatch Charlie's business up so that it could access the 4.25 million college students that Frank said used it, a user base that seemed to be rapidly growing every year. So with all this in mind, you can see why JPMorgan thought that Frank was a good investment. Now the problem was, though, that Frank had nowhere near the number of customers that Charlie said it had, which was a hard reality that JPMorgan found out only after it paid $175 million to buy her company.
How in the world does this happen? How does JPMorgan, right, one of the biggest, smartest global investment banks out there, somehow not figure this out before they lay down 175 large?
Well, up next you're going to hear JPMorgan's version of events detailing how this whole scheme went down. This episode is brought to you thanks to the generous support of viewers who've joined my Patreon. If you're able to give a small monthly contribution, that goes a long way in supporting these investigations into scammers and schemers so that we can help expose them and help people avoid financial harm. You also get first access to behind-the-scenes channel news, and you can help me decide video topics, thumbnails, and merch designs. Not to mention, at the top level, you get an exclusive Thirsty Stan mug. And on that note, I want to give a very special shout out to my Thirsty Stans, Nick and Randy. Your support means everything to me. I appreciate y'all so much. It was January 2021 when Charlie Javice decided to make some aggressive changes to the marketing materials for her company, Frank. That's when JPMorgan says that Charlie was preparing for a big meeting with an investment banker where she wanted to convince the banker to take Frank on as a client, and it seems like Charlie really wanted to score this deal. According to internal Slack messages at her company that JPMorgan shared in court filings, it was right around this time that Charlie told her team to change the text on Frank's homepage to say that 4.25 million students are using Frank to get aid. Now the employee who gets these instructions is like, please wait, and they ask Charlie very nicely, can we tweak the language a little? And I'm guessing that's because they were concerned about the accuracy of Charlie's new claim, especially considering that Frank's homepage at the time said that the company had only helped 350,000 people access financial aid resources. Now, in response to her teammates' request to rethink the wording, Charlie says, sure, but we need to update the numbers so everything is consistent with our presentation. Who cares if it's consistent with reality? Just make sure it matches Charlie's sales pitch. Side note, if you're ever buying a company, be sure to check Wayback Machine for last-minute updates to the website before you commit to an acquisition. Anyway, after Charlie orders these revisions to Frank's metrics, the news trickles down through her company's workforce, and junior members of the team can't believe the new numbers they're seeing, and they don't hold back in private Slack messages. LOL, are these your numbers? Tuition savings? Of course not. These look like Charlie numbers. Where is this number coming from? LOL. Right? Also, the 4.25 million students? Where? Charlie is the king of finding magic numbers. Haha. Do we really have 4.25 million students? Is this real? Why do I feel like it's so much smaller? I don't know where they get this number. I think they're talking about the number of students at our partner schools or something. Based on what? I feel my blood pressure rising. Why? What's going on? Acquiring 3 million new students? Getting 30 new partners? LOL? Lols. 3 million? 30 new partners? With what army? LOL? Now, not only are Frank employees questioning the sanity of Charlie's new numbers, but it also turns out that building a brand on BS is not great for team morale because at least one employee was strategizing about their next career move. Do I just go back to social and be a specialist and get paid more for something more simple? Sounds good to me, haha. Right? I'm so over it. New students and expand partners? Kill me. I'm gonna create an Upwork for freelance. Haha, smart. I can't leave till I at least find something, freelance or otherwise. Sounds like the right move for you. Feel like you've been getting more and more fed up. I straight up was on Upwork most of the day after. I am extremely fed up. Now, around this time in early 2021, Charlie was not only making sudden changes to Frank's marketing assets, but it also appears she was polishing up her company's financials. In February, her employee sends her the revenue tab from Frank's budget, and Charlie replies, "Let me check it, because this is the internal versus external stuff." And this worries me a little bit because why are there separate internal and external budget docs? Shouldn't the revenue numbers be the same no matter who is looking at them? Well, who knows if that applies to Charlie, the king of magic numbers, because the next day she is talking about the data with her chief growth officer, Olivier Amar, who is the second most senior exec at Frank, and she tells him, we can go through and decide how to position the good numbers. Basically, it's your job to pick what metrics look fantastic, so let's see what we can pull. Engagement increase, for example. And after they discuss the numbers a little, Charlie says, regardless, we're gonna make the numbers happy. But Charlie's happy numbers had some of her employees concerned. One team member who was reviewing the budget said, I need to ask Redacted about why she recategorized C expenses and then the expenses went down by $9,000. In another message, a Frank employee is anxious about a presentation deck that they've just reviewed and given a ton of feedback on, saying, I understand I may be taking too much of a red pen sword to it, and there is a balance with optimism and salesiness, but the two things I am worried about are we setting ourselves up for a rough reckoning and diligence, similar to experiences we had with Redacted? Are we actually going to get good advice because bankers are going to go off of what we tell them? Hopefully Redacted looked at these first and they are legally defensible, lol. Honestly. Well, y'all, that is currently being determined in court, but let me not get ahead of myself. As Charlie is meeting with these banks in early 2021 and she's pitching her company Frank as a great buy for them, one of Frank's largest investors decides to hit up JPMorgan Chase and persuade them to consider getting in on the deal. This investor sent an email to a couple JPMorgan executives, and they shared one of the many news articles that Charlie racked up for Frank, praising it as a roaring success. And this investor also said that Frank was getting real inbound interest and thought someone at JPMorgan should have a look. Well, the leadership at JPMorgan agrees, and they set up some meetings with the Frank team. Charlie flashes her impressive magic numbers at JPMorgan, whose bank execs drool at the thought of scoring millions of fresh young customers, and ultimately, Frank's new sky-high metrics convinced JPMorgan that Charlie's company is worth shelling out $175 million for. And this is where you might be thinking, hold up, if JPMorgan bought Frank for this hefty price tag because of all these users that Frank supposedly had, then why didn't JPMorgan verify that user data before it paid all this money? Well, JPMorgan insists that they tried to, but that Charlie orchestrated a calculated scheme to deceive them by fabricating her company's user base. After several meetings between Frank and JPMorgan in 2021, the bank said it was almost ready to pull the trigger on this merger deal, but there was one catch holding the transaction up. JPMorgan said it wanted to confirm that Frank actually had the 4.25 million users that Charlie said it had, and they said that as long as the data checked out, the acquisition was good to go. But there was a problem. Whenever JPMorgan asked Charlie for its user data to review, they said she kept shutting them down and telling them, I want to show you the data, I really do, but I just can't hand you over my user data. I mean, they have trusted me with their personal information. I can't violate their privacy like that. I guess Charlie forgot that multiple versions of Frank's privacy policy said it was allowed to share user data in the event of a merger, including without limitation during the course of any due diligence process. On top of that, Frank was already allowed to share its user data to market products and services of third parties and with publicly accessible search engines. So I'm guessing that means those scummy sites like True People Search that dox everybody's details online, which are the worst of the worst when it comes to privacy. So clearly Charlie didn't care about keeping her users' data private, but I guess JPMorgan bought her BS, or maybe they were just so desperate to do the deal that they finally gave in and said, look, Charlie, if you're that worried about keeping your users' data private, then here's what we can do. You can send the data to a third party who will verify that it's all good, and then they can confirm to us that everything is legit. Which to me doesn't make any sense. If Frank could share its data with a third party, then why couldn't it share the data with JPMorgan? Plus, the third-party vendor that was picked to check the data was a company called Axiom.
There are hundreds of data brokering companies in the U.S. One of the largest is a company called Acxiom.
Acxiom makes its money by selling your personal data to brands who then exploit that data to sell you stuff. So already I feel like JPMorgan should have smelled something fishy. I mean, we're just getting started, and we've already covered plenty of warning signs in this video that something might not be right about this data. But JPMorgan was ready to roll with this plan. Acxiom was going to check the data, and they were going to tell JPMorgan that it was all good. And so now Charlie needs to come up with some BS data to give to Acxiom to make sure this sale goes through. According to JPMorgan, this is how it went down when Charlie faked Frank's data. JPMorgan says that the first person that Charlie goes to help her create millions of bogus users was the head of engineering at her company, Frank. But he's like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to go to jail. And she says, I don't think anybody's going to end up in an orange jumpsuit over this, which is not what you'd say if you were doing something totally ethical, right? Anyway, after her employee turns her down, Charlie looks for an outside accomplice, and she found the perfect guy to help her out at a college campus in New York. Charlie hires a professor in data science at a highly respected university who also freelanced on the side and who had advertised that he offered creative solutions to data problems. Then Charlie gives the professor a list of users containing a bunch of data for them: their names, their ages, their email addresses, what colleges they attended, etc. Now, this list contained Frank's actual users, so it wasn't very long. And so Charlie tells the professor, look, I need you to create me millions of users that are just like this using synthetic data. And I know that probably sounds really sketchy, synthetic data, like how could that ever be okay? But actually, creating synthetic data can be a totally legit thing to do. So let's say you're testing out an app and you want to make sure that it runs properly or that it can handle a certain amount of traffic, then you might use an algorithm to generate a bunch of synthetic data or artificial data that you can then plug into your app to make sure that everything works right. Now, normally, because synthetic data is just used for testing, it doesn't need to look real. So, for example, if you had a column listing the colleges that students attended, you could just add phony school names like the University of Tofu or Guzzle Institute. But in Charlie's case, she needs this data to look legit. And so when the professor comes to her and says, how should I come up with the college names for this list? He suggests maybe I could just draw a school name at random that's in the same state that's listed. And Charlie's like, that sounds perfect. Just pick a school, any school, as long as it exists. At another point, the professor points out a problem with the list, saying that over 600 people had the same phone number. But Charlie basically says, you know what, a few repeated phone numbers are fine. Just double check the duplication rate isn't more than 5 to 7%, which just shows you how little effort she put into even faking this list. I mean, that phone number that showed up over and over again, it belonged to an employee at Frank who had been testing their software. But Charlie's like, it's cool. JPMorgan's bought all this BS so far, so it's gonna be all right. So this spreadsheet is just getting slapped together with all this phony data, but when the professor arrives at the columns for the addresses, things get a little trickier. So each user in this list needs an email address and a home address. And early on in the process, the professor doesn't quite seem up to speed about what he was hired for. He seems confused because he messaged Charlie about what he should put for the user's email addresses, and he says, didn't we agree to make fake ones, a la asdougnussel@gmail.com? And Charlie writes back, well, the fake emails look real with an eye check? And I am not a data scientist, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this email address is gonna set off some alarm bells, Charlie. And so of course the professor tells her, yeah, the emails will look fake. And this is a problem because remember, Charlie is going to send this list to Acxiom, this giant data broker who probably already has all of our email addresses and who I'm betting has tools to check whether email addresses are legit. But since Charlie doesn't have legit email addresses, what's she gonna tell the professor to put in that column? Well, she's gonna tell him to just fill it in with a bunch of random numbers. And you might be like, hold up, how is that gonna be okay? Well, in the data world, using random numbers is very common. You see it everywhere. Serial numbers are a perfect example where each product is given a unique random number that specifically identifies it. Social security numbers are another example. Everybody is assigned a random number that's unique to them. And That's why these numbers are also called unique identifiers or unique IDs. Now, why am I giving you this data science lesson? Well, because Charlie told the professor to use unique IDs instead of actual email addresses. And the reason she could get away with this is because unique IDs are often used when sensitive personal data is being shared and privacy is a concern. So let's say a hospital wants to share a bunch of medical data so that a disease can be studied, but it doesn't want to put its patients' names on blast. So it could use unique IDs in place of the patient names and share their data anonymously, but still keep track of who was who back on their end. And so this is what Charlie did for her list of fake users. She told the professor to use unique IDs for the email addresses and home addresses. And in theory, JPMorgan was okay with this substitution. They said they knew that unique IDs would be used for addresses to protect user privacy, but they said they only thought a unique ID would show up if it was replacing a real address belonging to a real student who'd really signed up for Frank. They said they never dreamed it'd be used for fake accounts with data that was pulled from the sky at random. But none of that mattered to Charlie because she figured as long as she was allowed to dump random numbers into the spreadsheet, nobody would ever know the difference between real and fake accounts. And honestly, I feel like this professor probably should have suspected that this data was going to be used to con somebody, but maybe he was willing to overlook that fact because he was being paid $600 an hour, which was double his normal rate. When this professor sends Charlie a bill for his work, it initially includes some very specific line items about what he did, like the fact that he had to look into the white pages, or generate college majors, or fill in missing states, tasks that you wouldn't need to do if this data was legit. And so this invoice was a very incriminating paper trail. And so after Charlie gets this invoice from the professor for about $13,000, she emails him back and says, "Can you send the invoice back at $18K, but with just one line for data analysis?" And the professor replied, "Wow, thank you. Here's the new invoice." According to the professor's bill, the last task he did was file uploading. So I'm assuming that means he uploaded the final file of fake data for Charlie, and he says he finished that task at 10 a.m. Now, JPMorgan says that it was only 8 minutes later that Charlie emails Axiom, the company that was supposed to validate this data, and tells them the file with the data has just been uploaded, which is mind-blowing to me. You're about to scam the biggest bank on Wall Street, and you don't want to take just another minute to look over that spreadsheet? But anyway, what happens next is the Axiom then hits Charlie back up and says, "We've looked over the data, we've analyzed it, and here is our report." And then, according to JPMorgan, it is less than 4 minutes later that Charlie replies to Axiom and says, "I would love it if you could destroy all that data I just sent you. And if JPMorgan asks for any background info, just don't say anything." Now, Charlie sends the fake data over to Axiom on August 5th, 2021. And I guess Axiom thought everything looked all right because 3 days later, a merger agreement is signed where JPMorgan agrees to buy Charlie's company Frank for $175 million.
Jamie Dimon declared last year he planned to get more aggressive in seeking takeovers, and he's certainly made good on that promise with JPMorgan buying another financial startup. This time it's college financial planning platform, Frank. Hugh, why this deal?
You know, the short answer is what they're getting is a software platform. It's got 5 million users. You know, JPMorgan wants to get in on that. So this is their play to sort of get people hooked into the Chase ecosystem at an early age.
When I told my mom the news, she said, "Of course JPMorgan bought Frank. You said you would, they would be your number one when you started the company."
After this big acquisition deal closes, Charlie immediately becomes a very rich woman. She not only got $21 million up front from JPMorgan to buy out her stake in the company, but JPMorgan also gave her a cushy job at the bank where she'd be leading Frank internally and where she'd make $300,000 a year with potential bonuses over $20 million. So it might sound like Charlie is walking away from this deal flush with cash and like she got away with this crime, but here's the thing. We know by now, after seeing Charlie's long history of failed businesses, that she's never really been good at doing her research and getting the details of a plan right. And so I don't know if she thought she would get to this point and then the deal would close and she'd get paid millions by the investor and that would be it. After all, Charlie's never run a legit profitable business to my knowledge. I didn't find any evidence she has experience in that. But she sure had plenty of success lying to investors to get them to fund her fake companies, so bless her heart, it might not have even dawned on her until now that JPMorgan was going to try to make actual money from actual customers, and so now Charlie's got to figure out a way to replace all those random numbers in the spreadsheet with real email addresses before she hands that list to JPMorgan. Now that JPMorgan has paid out all these millions to buy Charlie's company, right away it asks for that precious spreadsheet of user data. And Frank tells the bank, yeah, about that. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get that to you right now because we're super busy fixing a critical bug over at Frank, and so we're going to have to circle back. And JPMorgan is like, what bug? I don't see any bug reports on your website. And besides, didn't you just send the spreadsheet to Axiom? Can't you just forward that email? How hard is it? Well, it was really hard because Frank didn't have any actual email addresses for college students. And so now where is it going to find that data? Are they just going to go onto Google and type in buy marketing data for students and then click on one of the first results that says it's the nation's leading provider of student data? Yep. Yeah, they are. According to JPMorgan, Charlie's co-founder at Frank hits up this company, ASL Marketing, and buys a list of real data from millions of students for $105,000 using Frank's business credit card. Charlie also hits up her sketchy professor friend again and gets him to contact a bunch of other data companies so they can get even more email addresses. And one of the firms that he contacts is Axiom, who wants to know who the professor is working for. And so he goes back to Charlie and he asks, I imagine that's now JPMorgan? And she's like, no, we can't say JPMorgan is buying this data. But as it turns out, JPMorgan was buying this data because the $105,000 that Frank had paid for all those emails from ASL Marketing that was charged on its business credit card was paid off by JPMorgan when it bought the company. And so Charlie's scamming them in every direction. After Frank fills in the spreadsheet with all of this freshly purchased data, it finally sends it over to JPMorgan 3 weeks after the original request, and it says, ta-da, here is all our user data. Now this is where things are going to get fun because coming up next, JPMorgan is going to find out they've been played and they are pissed. They're going to slap Charlie with a giant lawsuit that's going to blow her name up in the press and ruin her carefully bullshitted persona. But Charlie's not going to go down without a fight because she's going to sue JPMorgan right back and accuse them of being the ones at fault for this whole ordeal. Then Charlie's going to pull what might be her most impressive stunt yet, convincing a judge that JPMorgan owes her even more money. It is wild, y'all, so if you want to see that in the next episode, then you can find a link to that video down in the description or in the end screen coming up. And I also want to know your thoughts. What do you think of Charlie's fakery from this episode? Does it make you question humanity deep in your soul like it does for me? Let me know in a comment. And since you made it all the way to the end of this video, then leave the #EmptyMug in your comment. And also, if you want to give this video a like, then I would really appreciate that. If you want to see more videos like this where I investigate scammers and schemers, then subscribe so you can slurp up all the tea I'm spilling here on Guzzle about shady moneymakers. All right, y'all, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.